Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Connie Carter, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to talk about donor-centered fundraising and the role of boards of directors in helping to make that happen. I've been working in fundraising my whole life, fundraising in nonprofit organizational development and consulting. And for the last 16 years, I've had my own business with Corrine Sylvia and Carter and Associates. And we provide consulting services for nonprofits, many of which are in Chester County, and do a full range of strategic planning, feasibility studies, capital campaign work, development program assessments, board training and workshops. In short, all kinds of things designed to help nonprofits increase their effectiveness and do what they do better. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And for those of you who have been to these workshops before, you're probably very familiar with this slide by now, enumerating the 7 primary board duties. Today, we're going to talk about number 5, the dreaded ensure adequate financial resources. And this actually means several very important things. One, it means that 100% of the board members on a nonprofit board make a financial contribution to their organization. And that's extremely important because when you go out and you ask other people to give money to your organization, you have a whole lot more integrity if you know yourself in your heart you have already given. And sometimes savvy donors, especially if you know them, will even ask you that. They'll say, so what have you given? So it's a very important thing to make sure that every year that you make that cash gift, in addition to all the other fabulous gifts that you give throughout the year. And it also means a second thing. And the second thing is that all board members need to participate in some way in promoting fundraising and increasing your organization's fundraising capacity and success in raising funds. And we are going to talk today about scores of different ways that you as a nonprofit board member or as a nonprofit staff member can help your board members to get engaged in this truly inspiring work. Can we do the next slide? Corrine, you're up next.
Okay. I'm going to just present a brief overview of the areas that we're going to be touching on today. And as we go through the program, we will delve into them in a much deeper way. We're going to start with strategic planning, which is all about establishing your priorities, your fundraising priorities, what it is that your organization needs to be able to fulfill its mission in the most effective way possible. And the reason you want to start with strategic planning is very simply that it lets the donor know that these areas that you are presenting for funding come from a very careful, thoughtful, and deliberate process known as strategic planning. And so the donor has a level of comfort knowing that these priorities that you're talking about, these causes, these issues, this mission work that you are asking a donor to fund really come from across the pan of your organization. The board, the staff, volunteers have all participated in the strategic planning. So this is a well thought out venture. The second part, then we'll move on to the role of board and staff in fundraising in raising funds. And we'll talk specifically, as Connie said, about the kinds of things that will be required of you as a board member and as a staff member. Then we'll move on to effectively preparing and articulating your message. And there I'm going to talk about the importance of presenting your information to your donor in a way that is compelling, urgent, and really focuses on your donor's passions and interest. And finally, we'll move into what a successful solicitation looks like. We call it the art of the ask, and it really is a bit of art and it's a bit of science. And it is, again, going to be framed in the way in which a donor is going to be listening and hearing and taking that information in, which is called donor-centered fundraising. Could we have the next slide, please?
So this slide really is just a diagram about strategic planning and how it moves from establishing your mission, goes all the way to some very detail-oriented action steps. And as Corrine said, strategic planning is the essential first step in identifying programmatic priorities and therefore your organization's funding needs. Because everything that you do in a given year needs to be the outgrowth of your strategic plan. And as she said so well, this is so important to funders and donors because it shows that your fundraising initiatives are the result of a very thoughtful, very deliberative, very intentional process, not just casual ideas about what might be nice to do or what might be nice to have. So it starts here on the left with the mission down the left, where it says it starts with the big picture of the mission, which in turn, moving to the right, forms a basis for the vision, the values, and your target markets that you want to connect with. Because again, everything that moves along on the right side towards the right side of this diagram is an outgrowth of the mission. So the vision, the values, and the target markets, in turn, build into a development of the analysis of where the organization is today internally, meaning its strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities, and its threats or challenges, including your collaborators and your partners. Continuing to move to the right from that foundational and framework of information, it goes to the development of goals and detailed action steps that are designed to build on the strengths that you've previously identified, address some of the weaknesses, take advantage of some of the opportunities, and bear in mind the threats or the challenges, as these could potentially make accomplishing your work a little more difficult. So it's always good to know where the landmines might be. So you can see that developing a strategic plan and identifying the funding then needed to accomplish the plan and the goals that it contains is the very first step that you need to take in undertaking a fund development process. So let's go on to the next slide, which shows just a sample of the type of agenda that an organization might use in accomplishing the steps that I just described that were listed out on the previous slide. So you can see in this planning session, it starts with a review of the mission, then talking about why are we doing what we're doing, what are our values, who benefits, why is our work important, and then it moves from there into external trends, looking at what's going on in the community, what are things that are either going to make our work easier or make our work more difficult. Then it looks internally at organizational strengths and vulnerabilities. What do we need to improve upon? What do we need? What is so good right now that we can build on that and use that to help us accomplish what we want to do? And then there's a prioritization process that where we identify, well, which of these things needs to be done right away, and those become very clear that they're priorities. What could wait, or what may take, say, 2 years out of this 3-year plan to develop? What are really long-term goals, and what are some shorter ones? And then ultimately, you would wrap up the session at the end by saying, okay, what are our next steps? Who's going to do the drafting and turn this into a brief, into a written plan that we can then come back to and reflect on? So this is just gives you sort of the nuts and bolts idea of how would you actually get into and do that nitty-gritty work of developing the components of a strategic plan. The next slide, and that's you, Corrine.
Okay, as Connie mentioned, the strategic plan is all about the funding priorities of an organization. So from a donor's perspective, it's the case for support. It's the reason for making a gift to your organization. And basically, it includes the kinds of things that a donor, a savvy donor, would want to know, would need to know before they could be moved from this place where they've considering making a gift to a place where they will make a major investment in your organization. And please be clear about this. Donors make investments in organizations. They give from their heart, they give from their wallet, but they give to make a difference. They give because it makes them feel good and because they want to have a positive impact on someone else's life. So it is an investment, and we as nonprofits need to remember that and honor that perspective and be able to articulate to our donor why this is important, what difference it's going to make, how it's going to be helpful, and be able to answer any questions that they come up with. We also want to talk about why is this important to the world, and your case for support is very important. The case for support is a seminal document. It's 2 to 3 pages, and it outlines the problems, the strategy for approaching those problems, and how you're going to, as a nonprofit, how you're going to solve those problems and satisfy the needs of your clients. And it's very brief, it's very concise, it's very professional and well written. However, it is also compelling, it's compassionate, it's urgent, and it's motivating. So in this 2.5 to 3 page document, you have a lot of work to do to get to the point where your case for support is something that a donor can pick up and read, understand what the project is, understand why it's important, understand why their investment is necessary, and understand the results that they will see as a result of that. So how are we going to meet that need is part of presenting that plan to the donor of how you're going to, what the goals are and how we're going to reach those goals and how we will know when we have reached those goals. And of course, it has to talk about how much it's going to cost. And a lot of time and effort needs to be put into the budget thoughtfully so that a donor can look at the budget and understand that you have or have not allocated enough money to be able to successfully complete the project. This is really important. I tell the story a lot, but I worked with an organization that wanted to do a statewide campaign to communicate the need for gun control. And in their line budget for communications was the grand sum of $5,000. Well, for a statewide campaign, clearly a donor will know that that's not enough money to do the job successfully. So remember, you want to be careful to include all of your costs and make sure that the amount of money that you have targeted to complete this project will in fact take you to where you want to go. Who else is involved is very important. A donor doesn't want to feel like they are the only one funding your project. So if you have collaborators, if you have other donors, it's very important to explain who's involved in this project, why they're involved, and to the extent that you can, how much they're involved. So a donor feels that there is a lot of support for this project out there, and they won't be the only ones. They won't be the only ones funding it. I want to be very clear again about what you need from your donor. Where does the donor fit in? Well, your gift of X will help us do A, B, and C of this question. So we want to be you want to be real clear about what it is that you want from your donor and what it is you're asking them to fund, and that they understand it and they understand the need for it. Because when a donor comes to the aha moment of, wow, my gift of X will actually provide money for a family who is living on the street to have temporary housing while they work with the counselors at your nonprofit to find more permanent housing down the road. Want to be able to tell the donor how we know we will be successful. So benchmark, what success looks like needs to be clearly articulated in the case for support as well as for the strategic plan. And what's in it for me, that final piece for donors? Well, what's in it for them is they have their questions answered. If we've been successful, we have spoken to the things that they are passionate about, priorities for them in making a difference, in impacting a life. We have given them this opportunity, presented them rather, with this opportunity to really make an impact on another person's life, to really make a difference. And most people would gladly write a check and feel good about doing something like that. Next slide, please. We're also going to talk a little bit about today's COVID-related challenges. And I know that I don't have to tell all of you that your special events, your galas, your auctions, all of the events that you do have been very iffy because of COVID, and even more so going forward. Those of you who are raising money from tuition and ticket revenues, you're facing the fact that people are not coming to your events, they're not coming to your they're not coming to your building, they're not coming to your programs. So those numbers are down. We also know that the novelty of online classes and conferences has worn off. How many times have you heard someone say, oh my, another Zoom meeting? Really? Do I have to do that? Because people are zoomed out. It's a whole new term. Some businesses and nonprofits are struggling, but many others are not. Many nonprofits are seeing a booming amount of need for the work that they provide. Consider food banks, consider people who, consider nonprofits who provide housing for people who are homeless. These organizations are overwhelmed with the kind of need that's out there. And many nonprofits' reserves are being depleted because they're using acquired assets, accumulated assets to pay for their operating expenses, because fundraising around operating expenses during COVID really took a dive. We all know that donors looked at all of the needs in their community, and clearly being able to provide health and food and a home was more important than some of the other things that we as nonprofits do. And we're all concerned about what the future is going to bring. So at the end of this presentation, I'm going to ask that some of you talk a little bit about what you've experienced through this COVID time period, and what your futures look to be. Next slide, please. Connie, I turn it over to you.
So I think despite all of that, it's important to remember that giving is a win-win, and it really does feel very good. And I think particularly coming off of COVID, charitable giving can give people a wonderful activity to do, to feel connected to the world and to feel like they are making a genuine difference. So let's talk a little bit about fundraising in general. I think that's important because we're going to be getting into ways board members can become more involved in fundraising at their various organizations. And Corrine and I work with many groups and their boards, talking with them about how to raise funds. And frequently we find that people think that asking someone to support their organization is asking that person to do something that's uncomfortable or undesirable or even painful. It's not a nice thing, you know, and that often makes it hard for board members to enjoy being involved in fundraising. It's like, you want me to do what? You know, it's that kind of. And so I'd like to offer to you today another way to think about fundraising. There are many reasons people make charitable contributions, and I know you all have your own reasons for why you give to the organizations you support. The mistake we often make is assuming that everyone gives for the same reason that we give. Learning what motivates your donor is key to success because it is a very, very individualized process. What inspires you about your organization's work may not inspire someone else. There may be a particular aspect of what you do that really excites you, and for someone else, it may just be like, oh, no, I'm not particularly excited about that. I had an experience once when I was working for a nonprofit that served older adults, and we needed a new roof. And we had a funder come through, and we were talking about the new roof, and the executive director was getting all excited about the roof. And, you know, the guy wanted a tour of the bad roof, and we gave it to him. And we said at the end, so are you excited about this? And he said, no. And we were like, ugh. He said, what I'm excited about is housing for low-income seniors. That's what I'm excited about. Your roof is not particularly dynamic. I care about the people who live here. And that was a really wonderful introduction to that for me 1,000 years ago. and his frankness in saying no, because we were excited about the roof, but that wasn't what excited him. So I'd like to suggest to you that you think about fundraising as giving people opportunities, opportunities to help make the world a better place, opportunities to connect with something larger than themselves. Making a gift to your organization, whether it's large or small, is a very direct way for a donor to contribute directly to making their community better and to make their own lives better in the process. It really is a true win-win situation. And I'd like you to think on that. Think about how you feel when someone asks you for money and you're able to give it, and you write that check or you do that PayPal or put it on a credit card. How good do you feel? You know, it's not like paying the electric bill, you know? It's a whole different feeling. And one of the wonderful aspects of the work that we do is we get to talk with people about philanthropy, why they do it and what motivates them. And I've learned over the years that philanthropy, again, whether it's a large gift or a small gift, can be transformative. And it's a very personal act and it's a very personal experience. And I'd just like to share a little story to illustrate this point. It's a story about a person who was a very, very, very successful mainline dentist. He was a cosmetic dentist, and he worked on the main line and had built up an extremely successful practice for himself. And, you know, he worked like 3 days a week and had long weekends and was doing just really, really well. And he had a colleague who lived in Florida, and periodically they would see each other at dental conferences and meetings and stuff like that. And every time he met with her or saw her, she would work him over about, you know what you really need to do? You really need to start a dental clinic for low-income kids because kids are dying for lack of dental care. This is really serious. And he'd go, yeah, you know, I like my weekends off. I like my, yeah. But she just never gave up. And so every time he saw her, she was like, I did this. I feel so great. It's a fabulous thing. And he's like, yeah. So anyway, to make a longer story short, they were out in California at a workshop once together, and she did the same thing again, telling him stories about kids whose lives she had transformed and who were out of pain and infections that had been cured and all that. And he's like, oh, okay. So he was getting ready to go on the airplane to come back home. And, you know, you always have to be really careful of what kinds of promises you might make when you're getting on an airplane. But anyway, nonetheless, he went ahead and did it. And he said, he was a very religious man. He said, okay, God, if I'm meant to do this thing, give me a sign. And on the way back on the airplane, a child was choking and he saved his life. And as a result of that experience, Kid Smiles, the pediatric dental clinic in Philadelphia, was founded. And since that time has saved thousands and thousands of other lives. And to hear him tell this story, and he told this very personally to me, every time he told it, he choked up. It was clearly an extremely meaningful moment in his life. It was transformative, and it gave new meaning and value to him. And I'd like to suggest to you that giving people the opportunity, and that's what it is, it's an opportunity to learn about your organization and participate in his mission, can do the very same things, maybe on a smaller scale, but it's all the same. Let's go to the next slide. Research is interesting. You know, there's organizations and people who research who gives money in America, and every year they do this research, and Corrine's going to talk about it a little bit more later. But, you know, the research has been basically the same year after year after year, approximately. In 2020, about 68% of all the charitable gifts in America came from individuals. And then if you add in another 8 or 9% for bequests, which are also gifts from individuals, you get a total of 77, 78%, almost 80% of the gifts in that particular year came from individuals. And in philanthropy, generally speaking, 80 to 90% of the funds will come from 10 to 20% of the donors. So the majority of the dollars come from a very small pool of donors. And those numbers really haven't changed much over the year. So quite frankly, individual donors are where the money is. So in order for any nonprofit to survive, it needs a strong, vibrant pool of individual donors. And this is where you, as board members and staff members working with board members, come in. Foundations can't sustain us forever. It's not their role. They don't usually make operating grants, and many won't fund ongoing kinds of projects. They often change guidelines, which may rule your organization out altogether. And some of them have very onerous reporting requirements. It's also important, major gifts and individual gifts are also important because you need to supplement and support the work that the staff does, because they can't do this single-handedly. No matter how fabulous your executive director or your development director may be, and I hear this a lot, oh, so-and-so will do it. We don't need to get involved in that. She could sell ice to Eskimos, so I'm not going to get involved. It's like, regardless of how great they are, they can't do it single-handedly. It really is a team sport. And they really do need your support and your participation. And lastly, and this is just true, there's no substitute for the volunteer role in fundraising. I hate to say it, but it's that simple. Paid staff or consultants just are not the same. You're doing this just because you care, not because you're being paid. And that's not to say that people who are being paid don't care, but it's a very, very different dynamic. And that's why your networks, your connections, and your willingness to educate people about your organization are vitally important to its success. Therefore, every person on a board needs to develop his or her own list of people who could be introduced to your organization and ultimately be asked to become involved. And there's many different ways that this can be done. Can we go to the next slide? So you want to put your energy into activities and things that are going to produce the most results. Oftentimes, people fear that the only ways that they can help is by asking people for money. And again, that's great if you're okay with that, but it's not the only thing that you can do. Again, it's a team effort. Not everyone on the team has to be a quarterback. And as a matter of fact, how ineffective would a team be if everybody was a quarterback? You need other people doing other roles as well. So the first thing we recommend you do is to look at your network. Think creatively about all the people you interact with. And even as we're talking here this afternoon, maybe you could jot down on a scrap of paper who those folks are. Think about your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, family members, vendors, attorneys, accountants, dentists, car repair people, business associates, anyone and everyone you come into contact with. Think about those. And then think about who you among those groups might you think might be interested in the organization you're connected with, and think about how could you introduce them to your organization. Maybe it's coffee or an after work drink with an executive director or another board member. Maybe it's a visit to the organization to see the work happening if you can. Maybe it's an invitation to an event or a small gathering of people. It could be on Zoom or not. It could be all kinds of different ways that you might be comfortable with that are how you could introduce someone to learn more about your organization. And maybe it's just sending those people a newsletter or an annual report or something with a personal note, or even just an email. Hey, I want you to tell you what I've been up to these days. So there's many different ways you can connect with that network. And here's a few more ways you can get involved. Let's go to the next slide. There are many roles that board members can take, as we've been saying all day. And I think if there's one takeaway from today's program that I would love you to have, it's that. It's that you need to figure out what you're comfortable doing and then do it. So here's a bunch of different ways that board members can be involved. Number one, we've already talked about, be a donor, to make your own gift. That is number one, most important. Be an ambassador. And this simply means you talk about your nonprofit wherever you go, whatever you're doing, you're talking about it. You are sharing your own personal feelings about the work that you're doing. You want to just connect with people, tell stories about what goes on, and you just continually talk about it wherever it's at all appropriate. What did I do this weekend? What did I do Monday afternoon? I went to this workshop with the Community Foundation, and we talked about ways I could get involved in fundraising for X. So that's just being an ambassador, just talking about it. That's a very important thing because it's very difficult to raise money for an organization nobody knows anything about. So that ambassadorship is real important. We do the next one. Another thing, another role is being a sleuth. And that could be doing research to try to find other donors, other potential donors. This could be adding names to a mailing list, asking others for advice about, hey, I'm involved with this organization. Who else do you think might want to get involved? Just listening, paying attention to things when people maybe talk about giving to another organization, listening to what they say and why they were motivated. They might say, well, why? You could say, well, why did you choose to do that? Well, I really care about X. And that gives you a really good insight into what might motivate them to give to your organization. I find a lot of times people love being asked for advice. And as a board member, you could simply go to a contact of yours and say, you know, we're trying to figure out ways to increase our visibility in the community. What do you think we should do? Do you think Facebook is the solution, or there are some other better ways that we could connect with people? Or we're thinking of doing this special event. What do you think we should do? Who would be a good caterer? Whatever. Just asking people for advice, because that gets them engaged in your organization and gets them thinking about your organization as a possible source, as a possible place where they might want to contribute. Let's go to the next one. And this cultivator is a really, really important one. The cultivator is someone who will participate in structured activities that are part of the fundraising process. One of the most effective ways to do that is to hold what we call cultivation events, or small group gatherings. And again, they can be on Zoom, they can be in person, with maybe several other board members, and each one of you invites 2 or 3 contacts. So it's a small group, but the messaging is very structured, and it's just a nice opportunity to introduce people in a very meaningful way to the work that your organization does. And generally at a cultivation event, if it's in the morning, it's coffee and bagels. If it's in the afternoon or evening, maybe it's wine and cheese or sandwiches or something. And it can be held, like, say, in your office or at the organization, or if someone has a home that's conducive to that kind of thing, you could do that. It's a very nice social opportunity for people to meet each other and learn about the work that's going on in your community. You know, I was talking with a major donor a couple of years ago, and I asked her, because, you know, do you go to all these fundraising events and things that go on? And she says, oh God, I've eaten enough rubber chicken, please. But she said, I will go if there's a possibility I'm going to learn something. For her, now that was her speaking as an individual, but for her, she would love to go to a cultivation event that might take an hour or an hour and a half or less, and she would learn something about some unique problem in the community or something that was being done to address it. So being a cultivator, that also relates to being a door opener. And you know, the Community Foundation has the Door Opener Award. There's a reason they have that award, because being the door opener opens the door for, number 5, the solicitor. It doesn't have to be you, but that door has to be opened somehow. And if you're the person with the connection with the donor, you can see how critically important that door opening role is, because the solicitor will never get in unless you do that. Being a solicitor, again, is a very specific kind of task. Often people who have sales or marketing backgrounds are really good at it, and they're comfortable in it. You can learn how to be a solicitor. Corrine's going to give you a few tips in a minute about how to do that. And you might just want to try it, because let me tell you, that feeling of walking away from a successful solicitation is a really good feeling. So it's something that you might want to try or consider trying. Certainly do it as part of a team with either another board member or a staff member from your organization. And being a steward, that involves thank you notes, thank you calls to donors after they make gifts. Those can be very low impact, low touch ways to get involved in fundraising. It's extremely helpful, very, very important. Continuing to stay connected with the donor so that they feel, wow, these people really care about me. It's not just the check that they want every year. Next slide, and that's Corrine, is going to talk about more ways to get involved.
Okay, we're going to spend the remainder of the time. Could you back it up, please, to the Ken Burns quote? Thank you. We're going to talk about reframing fundraising in a way that is donor-centered and inspirational. And Ken Burns is a very well-known professional. He's no longer with us. And he spent a lot of time doing research and focusing on building relationships in fundraising as a way to inspire donors and encouraging them to give. And I didn't come up with it, but this quote is fabulous. Fundraising is the inspiration business. And however much we try to elevate and complicate it, at its heart, it is little more than telling stories. So thank you, Mr. Burns, for that. Next slide, please. In this section, we're going to focus on 4 effective strategies for inspiring communication and successfully soliciting your donor. And these strategies are going to include the following 4 items: telling your story, donor-centered communications. Yeah, we're going to talk about what that really is, I promise. Knowing your donor, the importance of doing your research and building relationships. And finally, we're going to focus on donor-centered solicitations, how you do that, so that the solicitation that you plan and implement really focuses on the donor's interests and passions and not on the needs of your organization. Because donors don't want to feed your organization's needs. They want to feed their passions, their interests, they want to help. So it's a whole different way of looking at fundraising. Next slide, please. So let's begin with communicating with donors. The most successful communication is when board and staff speak with donors to thank them. And this is something Connie had talked about earlier with you, and to check in with them via telephone calls, Zoom meetings, and handwritten notes. I'd like to talk a little bit about the telephone call because it's very important for those of you who run organizations with a board that is a little timid about fundraising. One of the things that I learned when I was involved with Alex's Lemonade Stand, I was on the board, and one day I received a phone call thanking me for my gift, which of course, as a board member, I would do. And I was so struck with that. And it occurred to me that that's a great way to get boards who are not comfortable raising money and talking with donors, to get them engaged. That's a good first step. Ask your board members to call a donor and simply thank them for their gift. Identify themselves as a member of the board, a volunteer to the organization, who's calling just simply to say thank you and to ask what motivated you to make that gift. Use that conversation as a way not only to build the relationship, but to find out a little bit more about why that donor made the gift. And of course, handwritten notes. I know there is a question out there about, can we do handwritten notes? Can we do, an email? Handwritten notes are best practice. If a donor wants a gift, they definitely want to have the gift acknowledged in a way that is thankful, expresses gratitude and appreciation for the work that they did. I don't know about you, but an email wouldn't do that for me. In fact, I made a gift to an organization and they sent me an email thanking me, and I was really appalled by it. So it's not a best practice. I don't recommend that you do it. However, going forward, Generational differences are really important when you're responding to a donor. Older donors may be more prone to wanting to have that old-fashioned handwritten note or that old-fashioned letter that comes from the organization with, the IRS tax information on it, et cetera, et cetera. Younger people may be willing to take the email rather than the handwritten note, but that's something you want to ask about. I wouldn't assume that is something that would be appreciative. And these communications need to be coordinated, and they should not always be about fundraising, but about thanking the donor and about letting that donor know that they're in the impact that their gift has made. When you tell your nonprofit's story, you do so with inspiration and with gratitude. Now, preparing your message, be sure that your case for support is concise, is updated, is compelling, and is urgent. Your case for support is that seminal document from which all your other communications will come from, because you want to speak with one clear voice, regardless of who you're talking to and regardless of the venue. You want the message to be clear throughout all of your communications. How you do that will vary depending upon the platform that you use. Your message needs to be inclusive of inspiring stories from your volunteers and clients, not necessarily people who are working at your organization, but volunteers and clients, people who are either being helped or are volunteering to help. And you want to articulate the impact of your nonprofit's work and mission on the lives of those you serve. Always be mindful that donors make an investment in your nonprofit. Not a gift necessarily, but an investment to see you succeed in your mission. And they want to know that their gift is making an impact, so be sure to tell them that. Next slide, please. Tell your story. You want to tell your story in many venues, as I mentioned earlier. So it may appear on your website, in press releases, in social media opportunities and postings, talking points, videos, private conversations, all of the above. You want to tell your story in many venues. And again, be sure that you are casting the message in a way that is appropriate and will be heard to the audience, from the audience who will be listening. Be sure that it's consistent. For example, posting your case for support on the website is going to work very well because it's a written document. People expect to see it. They can click on it. They can make a copy of it if they want. It will answer all of their questions in depth. That's not going to work in social media. It's too long. It's too cumbersome. There are too many words. So you may want to share on your social media platforms stories that highlight your mission and impact. Stories about people helping people and how they succeeded. What the gift that you made was, how that impacted the person who received it. That would be hearing from a client. It should be a simple story, and it needs to highlight your mission and impact that is best suited to the venue. Again, so always think about the strategy that you want to use. It needs to relate to the audience that's going to receive your story. I always say a good guiding thought is make your stories relevant to your mission. In fact, think of your stories as your mission in action. Next slide, please. Okay, now for the fun stuff. This is all about research and relationships. So I'm going to talk now about donor-centered fundraising. Simone Joya, who was an inspirational leader in our profession, tells us that donor-centric is another way of building trust. A donor's relationship with your nonprofit depends upon how much trust you can create in these three areas. Trust that the donors play an essential, vital role in your mission success. Trust that your nonprofit does worthwhile things with a donor's gift, and trust that your nonprofit conducts its operations efficiently. To put this into perspective, most nonprofits focus on their own needs. The donor-centered approach puts the donor at the center and says, because of your gifts, we do this vital work. Your gifts stopped the river's pollution. Only with your gift can we feed hungry people. Your message needs to communicate to your donor that because of your donor, great things happen. That's donor-centered. Donor-centered fundraising fulfills our donors' 3 essential requirements with a prompt and meaningful acknowledgement whenever they make a gift. And this goes back to that old thing I was talking about, the note, the letter from the organization or the handwritten note. And industry standard is that a thank you note goes out 24 to 48 hours after a gift has been received by a nonprofit organization. However, I have talked with donors who've said, well, I sent my check 6 weeks ago, but they haven't even cashed it yet. And I've heard even more dire stories about checks never being cashed. So you need to be really prompt about this and find ways to get back to your donor as quickly as possible. And this is where having a board member make the call, if you can't get a letter out in 48 hours or even 72, have a board member call and thank that donor and advise them that a letter is forthcoming. Donors also need to know that every gift they make, regardless of its value, can be identified with a program, project, or initiative that the donor understands, that the donor has bought into, that the donor can articulate to someone else, because that's part of what an ambassador, a donor ambassador, will do with another potential donor. They'll talk about the project that they funded and how that spoke to their interests and what a difference that project is going to make in the lives of people. And finally, it's important that they receive a report in measurable terms on what was accomplished with their last gift. And that certainly needs to happen before you ask them for another gift. Absolutely. That also is a best practice. So with all of this knowledge about donor-centered fundraising, how do we build strong and lasting relationships with our donors? Well, we need to know some things about them. We need to know how the donor became associated with our nonprofit. How did they meet you? What's their history? How did they become connected and with you as well as with your cause? Who else in the nonprofit community who else in your nonprofit knows this donor, and what is it that they know about the donor? This goes back to what Connie was saying about fundraising as a team effort. So check in with members of your staff and see if they know this donor or know anything about them, because the more you know about the donor, the more you can build a relationship that's based on truth and trust and honesty. And you also, and this is critical, you also want to know who your donor would want to say yes to, or put it another way, who your donor would find it difficult to say no to. And that's the person you're going to ask to be the solicitor. It needs to be someone that is known and respected by the donor, and someone who has a level of gravitas, a level of integrity that the donor will respond to. And we know that's true from research, because one of the key reasons that people agree to make a gift is because someone they know and they trusted asked them to do so. So that tells us two things. There is no substitute for a volunteer who is involved with your organization and wants to make a difference, reaching out and talking to another donor and soliciting another donor. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we want to put ourselves in the donor's seat, and we want to do that by raising and answering the questions that are on this slide. So in terms of timing, Carrie Axelrod is the founder of Benevon, which is a seasoned organization that trains and coaches nonprofits on sustainable fundraising. And Terry Axelrod tells us there are 10 signs that a donor is ready to make a gift. The first is that they ask a lot of questions. And Connie and I have talked about this. This is absolutely true. It's right on target. 2, they return your phone calls. You know how many times you've had to call a donor and they don't call you back? Donors who are interested will return your phone calls. They bring friends to tours of your nonprofit so that they can learn more about your mission. They give you advice. They come to other events and occasions in the life of your nonprofit. They start talking about themselves and your nonprofit as we. Very telling. When a donor starts talking about we, and they're referring to you and them, we, that means that they feel very close to your organization and close to making a gift. They ask more questions about your fundraising. They want to know, how do you do this? How do you do that? Why do you do this? What's involved? They ask how else they can help. They hang around. They come to the office, they come to events, they hang around. And sometimes they even offer to give you money before you've asked them. And that's wonderful. In terms of time or place, you want to ask yourself what's best for your donor. Privacy is key in a solicitation. You'll be discussing money, which is a sensitive topic to consider. So you want to think about what's going to make your donor most comfortable. Well, so in terms of place, it may be their office or their home. It could be at your office where they can see your mission in action. And that's truly the best. When Connie was talking earlier about Kids Smiles, one of the things that made them so successful in their fundraising was that bringing a potential donor to this wonderful place that was so child-centered and focused on making children feel comfortable while they're at the dentist was a wonderful place for donors to see the real work of this organization and why it worked and how it worked. So if you can get a donor, a prospective donor, to come to your office and see some of your mission and work now at work. Now, I know that's not always possible, but when you can do that, that's a really smart way to initiate a donor and to educate them. As for the people, well, you want 1 or 2 people to be part of a solicitation team. So the first question you want to ask is, who are the best people? And who is the team member that the donor would have great difficulty saying no to? Because that person is going to be the one who asks for the gift. You prepare your team by practicing. Connie and I actually choreograph a preparation for a solicitation where we actually walk through the solicitation and we role play. And you want to continue to do that role play until your team is feeling comfortable and prepared. Because remember, your volunteers are people who are very successful in their own life. They have businesses that succeeded, or they have succeeded well in their profession. They don't want to look stupid and they don't want to fail. So it's our job to make sure that they are prepared and they feel confident enough to be successful. So picking your team, training your team is really, really important, especially to the point where they are comfortable and they can actually say the words, and we would like you to consider a gift of $300,000. The case for support is important because that's the focus of your ask, or specifically what it is you're asking them to fund. Your relationship and research will inform you of their interests. You'll talk to staff members, you'll take a look at where they have made gifts, what kinds of organizations they have been involved with before, what kinds of things they have done with your organization. Get a lot of information on that. And the way that you do that is by noting every communication or meeting that you have, that your organization has with that donor, making a note of it and putting it in a file. not just the data file, but if there are handwritten notes, put them in a hard copy file as well. Because going back through those kinds of informational pieces gives you a sense of what kind of relationship has been built over time with your donor. So your research, that kind of research is going to tell you what their interests might be. And with that, you take that information and you paint a picture of that vision with your donor. Think about how you're going to strengthen that case for the donor with the information that you have about their interests and their passions. You want to be concerned about what they're going to be concerned about. So you need to be thinking about that. You need to anticipate that there will be concerns and have a response prepared ahead of time. Common concerns are often about the amount of a gift and the timing of a gift. And remember, with respect to timing, that big gifts can be pledged over time. So that often allays the fears that a donor may be asked to write a check for an amount larger than they are willing to be, than they are prepared to do. Then, when all of that stuff has put aside, you ask your donor, would you consider making a gift of $100,000 to support this work? Be quiet. Don't say another word. And the reason you don't say another word is that the donor's taking in an awful lot of information that you just put on them. They're thinking about what you asked them to do, and they're thinking about, can I do it? And where did this number come from? And I've never been asked for that much money. And who knows what else is going through their head. Give them time and space to process that. When they respond, they may respond with, well, no, maybe, not yet. So you need to walk them through their concerns and try to answer their concerns for them, address their concerns, try to find out what's going to get them to yes. What are their concerns that are getting in the way of yes? And those are the kinds of questions that you address. If it's about time, you can talk about the timing of when that gift is to be made. If they need more information, answer their request for information. And maybe if they're still not comfortable, you want to just kind of back away from your solicitation until they get to the point where they feel that they have enough information to be able to make that gift. It has to be answered to the donor's satisfaction, not that, gee, I think I answered their question. I don't know why they're not, willing to raise money. This is all about the donor here, okay? If the donor agrees to make a commitment, you want to thank them, be grateful, be joyous, be happy, and provide them with the kind of information that they need to make that gift quickly, easily, and without a lot of trouble. It may be that you brought a pledge form with you that they can sign right there. It may be that they need an envelope to mail the check in, to mail in the check. It may be that they want to make their gift online because they're going to use a credit card, or they may need information on stock transfers. Whatever it is, find out and give them the kind of information that they need to be able to do what they want to do. I want to just go back for 1 minute to talk about the concerns. If a donor is not at the point where they're ready to say yes, I know that I told you to kind of back away. If you can't get them to get to yes in this meeting, set up another time to meet with them when you have all the information that they need, and you bring in another heavy hitter who this donor may know and appreciate and respond to. But all of this is to say, it really is about figuring out where your donor is and responding to their needs, their concerns, their issues, their fears, their worries, the whole thing. Okay, next slide, please. Now, these numbers are pretty standard over the years. In terms of donations, in 2020, $441 billion was contributed. And this was during COVID. And about 90% came from individuals. And the way I figured that is that 78% comes from individuals, and then another 9%, as Connie also said, probably comes from bequests. And then there's money that comes from donor advised funds at foundations, which is also donor initiated. So 90% is really a good number, regardless of what you're going to see out there. Now, corporations dropped in 2020 to 4%, and foundations increased to 19%. So for those of us in the community raising money, clearly we want to focus our money, focus our time and energy on those areas where there is the greatest opportunity. And certainly that is from individuals, and at 19% from foundations as well. And remember, Chester County is an abundantly wealthy county. There are people out there who have enormous means, and those are folks that you want to try to suss them out and create relationships with them. But all gifts are important. All gifts are important. So you want to really mine Chester County because it is a very good place to raise money. People often ask me, Corrine, you live in the city. Why do you raise money in Chester County? Well, it isn't just because Chester County has a lot of money. The city has a lot of money too, a lot of wealthy individuals. But Chester County is a kinder, gentler place to raise money. People know each other, they care. It's a strong community with a strong focus and center. So be aware of that when you work in Chester County. Be aware that kindness and manners matter, that being appropriate to the situation matters. Being able to understand that generous individuals want to make a positive difference, and your job is to help them see how they can do that. So some nonprofits are clearly stretched thin and all need resources. Now is the time for your nonprofit board and staff to work together to create these teams of vital fundraisers and ambassadors to go out and work to raise money to help your organization fulfill its mission. And as Connie said, 80% of your time needs to be focused on the 20% of the individuals or foundations from which you get 80% of your funds. And then 20% of your time probably is best spent on the 80% of your individuals who don't give as widely or as greatly as others. But remember, you always want to build relationships with them too. So you have to find ways to do that will be successful, but will also be time effective. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, now it's your turn. We've all been through a tremendously difficult time. What life lessons have we learned amidst this pandemic, this COVID pandemic crisis? I mean, I can talk till the cows come home, but I'd be very interested in hearing from you as to what your nonprofits have learned, what your takeaway has been from COVID. Anyone want to share?
Or if you'd prefer to put it in the chat, that's fine too.
Oh gosh, I can't maneuver the chat. Will someone?
Yeah, Jameson's got our back.
Okay, thank you, Jameson.
Hi, everyone. Since the floor is open, my name is Heather Grayberg. I am the executive artistic producer of Revival Productions, which is a theater and performing arts company and conservatory in Coatesville. And we had the very unique challenge of opening our first facility right in July of 2020. So, yeah. And you know what, we're still, this year we're feeling last year's blows still. Theater is open, but there's still people not comfortable. There's still people that are fighting the mask or don't mask. And in that pivotal time where we would have really been building our donor base, we how do you ask people for money when they don't know if they're going to be laid off, if they don't know if they're going to have a job, if they don't know if they're going to, all those different questions. So we really, we had to get smart, and we got to the point where we thought, okay, how can we shift to filling a human need right now? So one thing that we did was we started a cohort academy, because we have this, robust conservatory, and then we ended up opening our doors for children whose families were at work all day, and we hired teachers to come in here and help with the Zoom sessions, and we basically created school for them.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
we never had an outbreak of COVID. We actually ended up getting, a lot of students got grants that ended up funding them to be here. So, and the cool thing was that once we could start to rev up our regular programming, a lot of those families and children ended up doing our services that we offer here. So but I think like the biggest thing with COVID, and, again, we're still facing the blows. It's still a tremendous challenge, but it's like nothing's off the table. And at the end of the day, like, how can we get back to the heart of the people? We had our whole industry was ruined in a lot of ways, and many companies folded, but I like to think of being creatively adaptive, and we're trying to get up and swinging now that we're going into our regular kind of programming. But I like to think that, those of us that have been resilient, whether it's, whatever your nonprofit or for-profit business is, that resiliency, I think it helps you question the deeper why of our visions and missions overall, and why we continue to fight for the things that we believe in, and why we continue to love our nonprofits. So that's just a little bit of what we did. But I think that, getting back to that deep why of why we exist and how we exist.
Thank you for that, Heather. That's very helpful. Thank you. Very inspiring. Anyone else?
We have a comment in the chat from Dana Wiley, who said, people want to help and can still be generous. Some are less able, but still want to do what they can. And that's absolutely what we're seeing, is someone may have concerns about their employment, or some things may be unsteady, or, we're all hearing the gloom, the, concerns about how much is heating oil going to be, or winter costs, or things like that. But people still are going to have that desire to connect. So their gifts may be smaller, but that doesn't mean that's where they're going to stay for all time either. So it goes back to what Corrine said, is thank people over and over again, because once you get a donor, it is much easier to keep them than it is to find a new one. So I think that's a really good point.
I have a question here. It says a case I ran into a few years ago, and I'd love to get your take on it, on what to do, or how this organization should have handled it. And it was an organization that had a pretty steady donor for a number of years, and all of a sudden the donor stopped giving. The development person came into the position and did a little sleuthing and found out that there was a miss in terms of, a thank you and a follow-up to a generous gift. What does that development person do now? Do they own up to the mistake? Do they, start with, here's what the organization's done? Do they call attention to the elephant in the room, so to speak? What are your suggestions?
Yes, call attention to the elephant in the room, address it directly. You need to go and talk to that donor and apologize. Don't explain it, apologize for that oversight, and let the donor talk and vent and get it all out. Just listen to that donor vent, because the donor isn't going to move anywhere until they feel they have been heard. Connie, what do you think?
Absolutely. I would take it head on, because it's going to be an obstacle if you want to try to rebuild that relationship. So, and I think I love what Corrine said of don't try to explain it or rationalize why it happened. It's all about apology, and try to communicate also that oversight was in no way indicative of the fact that the organization did not appreciate and value what the donor did. it was a mistake. But again, you don't want to it was a very horrible oversight, but you don't want to get into, oh, come on, it was a mistake, lighten up. You want to just acknowledge it was a really bad mistake and we feel very badly about it. And then try, if you can, but to move on into, would you like to hear some other things about what we've been doing in the meantime, but not until you really get a feeling this person is okay and has had their say.
Now, does that apology, should that come from a board member, an executive director, or the development person?
I think it would be, I think it depends on the donor. If the donor maybe knows a board member, that it might be a team thing, especially if this is a significant donor. It might be a case of the executive director and the board member having the conversation. If it was a large gift, because having a staffer like the development person handle it, that may not be enough respect up the food chain for that donor. It also depends upon who they are. On the other hand, some development people become really good friends with donors and they have very lovely relationships. But you indicated the development person was new. So I would think in that situation, it might be better if it was the board, like a board member and the ED doing it. What do you think, Corrine?
No, I agree. In fact, I had a client once where member of the staff embezzled over $1 million from the organization. And the leadership at the organization went to every one of their major donors who had made a gift to that campaign and explained the situation, explained and apologized for it, let the donor vent. And when the donor was through venting and their questions had been answered thoroughly, the nonprofit told them what they planned to do about it, how they were going to go about handling this situation. And you know what? Their donors stayed with them because they hit it head on and they were honest and they were authentic. Really makes a difference.
Thank you.
So much of charitable giving, and Corrine touched on this, is based on trust. It really is. It's based on trust and in the nonprofit sector, and that's why when these things come up, like somebody with a Ponzi scheme with nonprofits, which happened back in the 90s, or certain charities with crazy amounts of money going to things that they shouldn't be going to, or whenever anything like that ripples through the nonprofit sector, it's such a significant thing because we basically need our nonprofits and we want to trust them and that's why this nonprofit work that we are all doing is so important, and why ethics are so important, because we are entrusted with other people's money. And it's that exchange, that contribution exchange, that investment is solely based on that trust.
Yes. How are we doing on time, Stephanie?
So we have a few more minutes if anybody else would like to ask a question. Otherwise, we can wrap up. I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. It's been great to see you this afternoon. I hope you've gotten some tips and some ideas to take away, maybe scratch on the back of an envelope or start building yourself that fundraising plan. And if you're a staff member in an organization, connect with your board members and help them to do that.
And if you have questions, reach out to Connie and me. You have our emails, so just reach out. We're happy to help. Thanks so much.
Hi, Connie. It's Sandy. Good to see you.
Sandy. Good to see you.
I'll see you at our board meeting soon.
Okay.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Terry. Oops.